Hey everybody. First of all, I really apologize for my voice. I've had this cold that never really turned into a cold, but it never went away either. Um, anyway, it's weird. So I was never completely sick, but have not felt completely well for about the last week or so. But for you, what it means, you have to listen to me, and I sound very hoarse, and I apologize. And I'll also clear my throat. It's going to be a disgusting couple of podcasts, so fasten your seatbelt. Okay, the last thing I talked about in class on Monday was the rise of Santa Anna. And Santa Anna, as I said on Monday, very complicated figure. And I'll tell you how complicated he is. He was elected president of Mexico um, in like 1834, and you don't have to remember that. But so he's elected president, and then he sees that as president, he's going to have to do a lot of things that's unpopular. So he actually just retires to his hacienda near Veracruz, and he lets his vice president do a bunch of dirty work. And I don't have to go into the details of what was going on, but the vice president took a lot of unpopular measures, and then Santa Anna comes back and overthrows his vice president. Okay, how crazy is that? Santa Anna is elected president, then he kind of retires to his hacienda. He forefronts his vice president, lets his vice president make some unpopular measures, and then Santa Anna comes and overthrows his own vice president. I mean, that's just how crazy things were in Mexico. And the big point for Texas history is this, that in 1835, when Santa Anna takes over and becomes basically the dictator of Mexico, you have a shift. By the way, Santa Anna's on the screen now. You have a shift in the politics of Mexico away from federalism, which had dominated Mexican politics more or less since the Constitution of 1824, and towards centralization. So Santa Anna, in kind of the scheme that I've set up in understanding Mexican politics at this time, is a centralist. And he comes in, and as I said on Monday, he completely voids the Constitution of 1824. He takes away all the power, or most of the power, from the state governments that had been given to the state governments in the Constitution of 1824, and he concentrates all power in Mexico City. And so, just to repeat what I said in class, one of the ways of looking at the Texas Revolution, it's really part of the argument in Mexico about whether or not Mexico would be a federalist nation where power was diffused locally, or a centralist nation. And the other thing to remember is there were other revolts in Mexico against Santa Anna's dictatorship. I talked about the revolt in Zacatecas, where Santa Anna in 1835, he comes in and ruthlessly destroys this revolt. He kills a number of men, women, and children. And he's sending a message to all of Mexico, not just Mexican Texas: don't mess with me, because if you mess with me, I'll come in and I'll kill you. There is another revolt in the Yucatan against Santa Anna as well. So the revolt in Texas, beginning in the fall of 1835 and into 1836, is part of a nationwide feeling of unrest about Santa Anna's dictatorship. But Texas had a huge advantage that other Mexican states didn't have. And pretty obviously, that huge advantage is Texas was right next to the United States. And also, East Texas was virtually the United States by 1835. In terms of numbers, by 1835, 1836, there's about 36,000 people in Texas, non-Indians in Texas, about 36,000. And of those, something like 30,000 are Anglo, there's some slaves, and then really less than 2,000 Tejanos. I'll get you the exact figures. But the point is, Texas, and especially East Texas, the cotton growing areas of East Texas. Remember, you can't grow cotton in San Antonio because there's not enough rain. You can't grow cotton in Texas without irrigation west of Austin, really. So you had this intense concentration of Anglo-American settlement in East Texas by the time Santa Anna becomes a dictator. And the advantage that the Texas Revolution has that the folks in Zacatecas don't have and the folks in Yucatan don't have is the folks in Texas, the United States is right next door. The United States is very supportive of the Texas Revolution because the Anglo-Americans from Texas, they had just come from the United States. They had never become Mexican. They hadn't learned Spanish. They hadn't become Catholic. The vast majority of them were Protestant. And so they had very, very close ties with the United States. So this is the big advantage that the U.S. that Texas is gonna have in its revolution against Santa Anna, and its protest against Santa Anna, that other Mexican states don't enjoy. Okay, so let me see how long I've got in this podcast. I guess I can go. I'm 6:18. I'm going to continue this one. Okay, so Santa Anna, May 1835, goes into Zacatecas and destroys the city. At the same time, in the summer of 1835, the Mexican government, under the command of Santa Anna, reinforces its garrison at Anahuac. Remember I talked about Anahuac, I showed it on the map. It's a small Mexican fort where the Trinity River runs into the Gulf of, or Galveston Bay, and of course from Galveston Bay you can get to the Gulf of Mexico, usually to New Orleans. That was Texas's big trading partner, New Orleans. And so the Mexicans reinforce Anahuac because they're trying to get a cut off the profits that are being made in Texas off the growing cotton industry, the cotton going out of Texas and the goods coming into Texas. So where do you put a customs fort? Where you put them at the mouth of these rivers, especially the Trinity River, the Brazos River, San Jacinto River, because that's the gateway into Texas. There's not any significant roads in Texas. There's the old El Camino Real, but that's not a great road for shipping cotton. In Texas, the way things worked, the best transportation networks were not roads, they were rivers, because you could float your products down to the Gulf of Mexico, and once you got your products to the Gulf of Mexico, well, you were golden, because from the Gulf of Mexico you could get your cotton anywhere on earth. So think of the Texas rivers as highways leading to international commerce, what I've talked about, commerce, the so-called global cotton economy that I've talked about over the last couple of weeks. And rivers are by far the best transportation network. So where's the Mexican government going to put its fort? What's going to put its forts where these major rivers intersect or meet the Gulf of Mexico. So Anahuac is where the Trinity River meets the Gulf of Mexico. And the Mexicans have built a small fort there. It's not a grand fort or anything like that. The other thing you might remember about Anahuac is this is where we first run into William Barry Travis, the hothead South Carolinian that had come into Texas probably illegally after the law of April 6, 1830 had passed. There's a lot of evidence that Travis came to Texas because he'd killed his wife's lover. And he had to skedaddle out of South Carolina, and he, as a lot of folks did, he came to Texas looking for a new start, second chance, that kind of a thing, which is still true of Texas today. I think it's one of the glories of Texas that a lot of people come here for a fresh start, for a second chance in life. So you might remember that Travis comes in and he gets into a kind of a kerfluffle with the commander of the Anahuac Fort in 1832. He actually gets thrown in jail. And there's a little bit of bloodshed over that incident. Ultimately, Travis is released. But once again, in 1835, Travis will cause problems in Anahuac. And I'll talk about that in my next podcast.